What if you could design your life with the same incredible resilience and efficiency as the internet itself? Well, today we're going to dig into a really powerful mental model for your habits and goals, and it's all inspired by the hidden architecture that powers our entire digital world. Let's talk about the converged life. Just think about that for a second. The internet is, well, it's amazingly resilient, right? It always finds the fastest path for information, it reroutes around problems automatically, and it handles just a staggering amount of data with near-perfect reliability. So what if your own decision-making process, your own life, could be that smart, that fast, and that converged? So where does this idea come from? Well, it's inspired by a protocol called OSPF, which stands for Open Shortest Path First. You can think of it as the rule book that internet routers use to map everything out and find the absolute most efficient path for data. We're going to borrow that logic and use it to build a blueprint for a more intentional life. Okay, first things first. Before you can even think about choosing the most efficient path to a goal, you have to decide which sources of information you're actually going to trust. This is all about setting up your own personal hierarchy of truth. You see, in networking, when a router gets conflicting directions from different sources, it uses a value called administrative distance, or AD for short, to decide who to listen to. And the rule is super simple. The lower the number, the more trustworthy the source. This is the very first filter for every single decision. And this is where the metaphor just comes to life. We can map this technical concept right onto our own decision-making. At the very top, with an unbeatable AD of 0, you've got directly connected routes. Think of these as your core values, your gut intuition, things you know from your own first-hand experience. Way down at the bottom, with a really high AD of 120, you've got stuff like peer pressure or gossip, distant, unreliable information. And in between, you have things like your conscious willpower and your structured logic. The whole system is designed to prioritize from the top down, always. So, how does this actually play out in real life? Well, imagine a conflict. On one hand, you've got a core value, an AD of 0. You know from direct personal experience that exercise makes you feel better. But on the other hand, you hear some gossip, let's say an AD of 120, about some hot new trend. Your internal router, it doesn't even hesitate. It immediately discards that high AD gossip and installs the path based on your core value. The decision becomes automatic, and it's perfectly aligned with your deepest truths. But what happens when your main plan falls apart? We all know that happens. Well, this system is built for that kind of resilience with something called a floating static route. It's basically an emergency backup plan. You create a backup habit, and you give it a slightly higher AD than your primary one. So if your complex, high-performance diet fails one week, this floating backup habit, maybe a simple pre-planned meal, just automatically kicks in. It's your built-in safety net. All right, so once we've figured out what to trust, the next big question is, how do we choose between different paths? If you have multiple habits that all align with your values, how does the system pick the best one? Well, it all comes down to calculating the cost. Now, in OSPF, the cost of using any given path is calculated with a pretty simple formula. Don't worry about the math here. The key thing to understand is that high bandwidth link, a really, really fast connection, results in a very low cost. The system will always prefer the path with the lowest total cost. Now, the human equivalent of this is, it's incredibly powerful. Think of bandwidth as your personal energy, your time, your focus. When your personal energy is high, the cost of meeting your standards feels really low. That challenging task suddenly seems easy. But when your energy is low, that exact same task can feel incredibly expensive. And this right here is why being in a high energy state is absolutely crucial for building good habits. And this is where our typical way of thinking really gets challenged. We usually assume that fewer steps is always better. But look at this. Path A, with only 2 steps, has a massive total cost, because each of those steps is low bandwidth and super difficult. Meanwhile, Path B, with 3 easier, high bandwidth steps, has a tiny total cost. An OSPF-driven life understands that the most efficient journey isn't always the shortest one on paper. The engine driving all of this is something called Dijkstra's shortest path first algorithm. Now, it doesn't just look one step ahead. It looks at the complete map and calculates the cumulative cost of the entire journey. So the big takeaway here is that this system isn't about short-term wins or instant gratification. It's a system designed from the ground up for long-term cumulative efficiency. Okay, so we know how to prioritize our truths, and we know how to calculate the cost of our actions. But what about the map itself? For our final section, let's look at how to build and, maybe more importantly, how to maintain a coherent and resilient worldview. Every single router running OSPF in a given area has an identical copy of the map, and it's called the link state database. Here's the cool part. It's not built from rumors passed from neighbor to neighbor. No, it's a complete, totally verified topology of the entire network. For us, in our lives, this is our mental model. A worldview that's built from verified facts, not just hearsay. But building this map and connecting to new ideas or habits, well, it isn't instantaneous. It's actually a very deliberate process. It all starts with simple awareness, just hearing about a new habit. Then it moves to a two-way state where you start to actively engage with the idea. From there, you get to the exchange state. And this is the deep work, the practice and the learning. And only then can you finally reach the full state, where that habit is so integrated, it's basically second nature. And, maintaining these connections requires constant, consistent effort. OSPF routers send these tiny hello packets to each other every 10 seconds, just to say, hey, I'm still here. If a neighbor doesn't hear a hello within what's called the dead interval, that's usually 40 seconds, it declares the connection lost. It's a really powerful lesson. Our most important habits and our relationships require these constant, small check-ins to be kept alive. And this whole idea of maintenance goes even deeper. The information in your mental map, it actually has an expiration date. In OSPF, a piece of information is considered old and outdated after just 1 hour. To prevent this, the source has to refresh it with a new update every 30 minutes. This is exactly why habits aren't a set it and forget it kind of thing. You have to periodically apply fresh effort to keep them active and prevent your decisions from being guided by old, outdated beliefs. And that really brings us to the core takeaway of this whole idea. True, sustainable success isn't about finding the quickest shortcut or the path with the fewest steps. It's about methodically, deliberately building a life that's composed of high-energy, low-cost habits that are all deeply aligned with your core values. So I'll leave you with this one final thought. In networking, a network is converged when all the routers have the exact same map and they all agree on the best path forward. It's a state of perfect stability, efficiency, and coherence. So take a look at your own life, at your habits, your goals, your values, and ask yourself, is your life converged?